There are people out there all across the country pushing boundaries to grow the game of golf. Like champion speed golfer Lauren Cupp, who plays faster than anyone else. And Will Lowry, whose work in the golf community inspires more kids to get into the game. As a champion partner of the Masters, Bank of America supports everyone determined to find out what's possible. In golf and in life. What would you like the power to do? Bank of America. Bank of America N.A. member FDIC, copyright 2025, Bank of America Corporation, all rights reserved.
An in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Purdy Insurance, Brewers Outlet, and Sunbury Motor Company. Now from the Sunbury Motor Studio, here's Steve Jones.
And great to be with you on the show today. This half hour brought to you by Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors, Kia, routes 11 and 15. Hummels Wharf, online at sunburymotors.com. Ford, Kia, Hyundai, the best in new inventory. All with great warranties, great safety features. Really amazing in a lot of ways. Terrific pre-owned inventory, and they go over each one with a fine-tooth comb. It's the Sunbury Motors guarantee. It eases the buying experience. And a great service department. Whether it happens to be inspections, quick lane, routine, difficult, they handle it all at Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors, Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummels Wharf, and online at sunburymotors.com. Any opportunity to get to spend with Mark Wogenrich is always a slice of gold. Sir, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you with us.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Steve. It was great seeing you. It's been, I don't know, maybe a month ago or so, a little while ago at
Lou
Prado's service and a little get-together afterward. That was great, catching up with everybody, telling stories about Lou. He was such a unique figure and so welcoming to all of us who've been around. I just always loved talking to him about Penn State, sports history, football history. I just kind of wanted to make sure to get that up to the top, just to, hi, Lou, and thanks for everything.
I mean, very, very special guy who understood what we do and also understood it on the history end of it as well. And he was, my favorite was when he kept asking Rich for the password to get into the Red Eagle.
That was great.
Rich, I forgot it. I don't need a password. It's like, and then Rich is like, it is a paywall for a reason. All right, so, okay. I want to start with, it was just a marvelous story you did with Joe Battista with the Frozen Four coming up. And I'll relate something quickly, and I'll get to it. I remember it was after the Penn State LSU Citrus Bowl, and I had to go, I flew commercially, so the next day I'm at the airport, and I'm going to go to wherever next for basketball, whether it's Michigan, Michigan State, something like that. And I see Joe Battista in line. And this is what, January 2010?
Mm-hmm.
And he says to me, Steve, I've got a donor. All right, you do? He says, yeah. Terry and Kim Pagula, and he's going through the whole thing. Now, as you and I both know, it took a little longer to get this thing going. When you talked to him, what was the, quote, agonizing process for him to get the facility and the endowment of the program we see today?
It took 5 years, I think, was probably that it took 5 years. Might have been the most agonizing thing, even though, I mean, for him, it was probably a 20-year process, coming from as the Icers coach, always wanting to, he's always wanted to bring Penn State into Division I hockey, and he just didn't have the building, he didn't have the funding. There were Title IX issues, as he mentioned, and they're not for scholarships. So it always, but it felt like in talking to him, and I remember I had spoken years ago about this, but in talking to him again last week about this, and he was so gracious and just so funny and entertaining and just illuminating about the history, is how it started in 2005, and then it took 5 years. Part of that is just negotiations take a while. do when you're, giving a lot of money. But then there was the financial crisis of 2008, and that delayed things. And and then they kept trying, putting together the whole package and what was it going to entail. 2 teams, the arena, what the arena was going to look like, how much money they would need. They had to go back to them to get more money after the fact, and that that ultimately proved to be okay. And I felt like he just had the temperament for it because it took so long, that he had a sense of patience about him, and he had this sense of that kind of a commitment. He wrote a book, and I'm trying to remember the name of the book. I can look at it real quick, but it has to do with persistence, about being persistent in what you do, and he had that. I think probably that trait above anything through the whole thing. So when it finally happened, I think that that just unleashed a torrent of emotion, and then for this to go, for it to take 15 years, there's a persistence on Penn State hockey's part too that began, I guess, with Joe Battista.
No question about that with him, because it meant a lot. I remember doing the Icers hockey show with him in the 80s into the early 90s. And it always was something he was trying to get going. And, Mark, let's be honest. With the revenue sharing coming up, there are not going to be any men's ice hockey programs added for a long time because you can't take on debt.
Yeah, exactly. You have to build an arena and fund scholarships. I mean, hockey's going to be a tough enough one, I think, for some places to be competitive in. Even in like the Big Ten, because you're looking at Big Ten schools that are going to fund football first and foremost. They're going to fund football and basketball. Whereas a place, Penn State's going to play Boston University in the Frozen Four semifinals tomorrow night. Boston University, if they are going to, rev share, they're going to rev share probably more into hockey. University of Denver, similarly, is going to rev share more into hockey. The other Frozen Four team, Western Michigan, the first-time team, maybe they look into hockey as a place where they can be more competitive. And it'll be interesting to see where Big Ten schools are going to come down on how much they're going to be able to share, how much revenue they're going to share with their hockey teams. That to me, it's not even. It's going to go beyond adding to the point where some of the Big Ten schools might even be. They might have to recalculate how much, how much conviction they have, how much financial conviction they have with their programs.
Right, because, like I said, there's always the talk about adding to the Big Ten. Could Illinois add? Could Indiana add? Mark, nobody's going to add. Nobody has the financial resources
They're going to fund
it.
basketball. Obviously football and basketball. When you're funding those two things, that's going to be 90% of your revenue right there, or your rev sharing right there. Yeah. Probably more. Right.
Right. So in this journey, they finally get it. And I know that you only have X amount of lines you can put in. I remember the first thing that they talked about because of Title IX was Joe Batista's suggestion, was women's rugby, because it would be a sport that had the scholarship numbers and probably the fewer financial resources needed compared to women's hockey. But they decided in the end they added women's hockey because they felt they needed the balance of it. I don't know if he got into that or not.
No, he didn't. We didn't have. Yeah, we didn't get. Didn't really get that deep into it. It was just more largely about the men's program, but it was vital to add. To your point, I think it was vital for them to add the women's hockey team. I think that was also important in part for the Pegulas too. I think I don't know how much of a condition they made, but it was important to them that it was going to round out an entire hockey program, that they were going to have an entire hockey ecosystem there.
What were the most painstaking hurdles? Where it's like, there are always going to be hurdles, but you eventually can work it out, and you know, while you worry about it, okay. But there are others that were like, oh God, I don't know if we can do this or not. What were those?
I think it was money. It was the arena and the money until he got that call from Terry Pegula in 2005. I don't know if Joe ever really. I don't think until even that he thought it was going to be a possible. They needed somebody who could write a big check. He went to Terry Pegula. When Terry Pegula called him in 2005, this is the story he told me about that. They went to Kelly's for dinner, and Joe went there with a number in mind. He said, we need $50 million. And he thought he was kind of, he didn't know how Joe or how Terry Pegula was going to react to that. Would it be, that's not enough? Would it be, are you nuts? He really had no idea. But that was going to be that. I really think that was the block more than anything, because you need a building and you need building, scholarships, all that. You just needed a big chunk of money, and crowdsourcing that wasn't going to really work, because how much money are you going to get from your former players? I mean, not to say the former players aren't successful. There's some very successful former Penn State hockey players in business out there. But were they going to be able to crowdfund 8 figures? And, I just feel like until he got to that, there was no Division I hockey. Everything else they were able to sort out. The arena, a league to play in, getting into the Big Ten, that sort of thing. Like we discussed, having the women's team, figuring out the Title IX issues, that was all negotiable. And I think even going back to the Pegulas and saying we need a little bit more money, and they got an additional $14 million after the first $88 million dollar donation, so bringing the whole thing to 102. I think they even felt a little bit, maybe a little bit awkward about that. So ultimately, and then then they build, they break ground during, it was after the scandal, after in 2011, they break ground on this arena, and they're going, what are we building into at this point? Those are all, I think, little side, maybe just, auxiliary concerns sort of thing. I think Joe even said he felt like maybe that this was going to be kind of a positive boost for athletic department morale in having this construction go on at that time during a period when there's a lot of just uncertainty about athletics, but also debt. I mean, just with the fine and things like that. So I just ultimately once he got the donation, once they got that, I think everything else felt like we could work through pretty much anything at this point.
Yeah, because the timing of it, the two guys that walked over together and sat together at the groundbreaking were Bill O'Brien and I. So we were sitting together. It was like, okay. All right. Did you get to Allentown to see them play? Did you get over?
Yeah, I did. I got there on Sunday, and that was the first Penn State hockey game that I'd seen in a while. What an unbelievably, really good atmosphere. I wasn't there Friday night because that was pro day. So I did get to see him Sunday, and I've seen Penn State wrestling at PPL Center, and we'll say, when Penn State comes to PPL Center to wrestle against Lehigh, they'll put over 9,000 in that building, floor seats and things like that. But this crowd, it was really good because it went both ways, because UConn's really not that far from us anyway. It's about 3 hours. It's not a whole lot farther than State College. So there was a good UConn crowd there. But the action in that game, the speed of it surprised me. The action, the way the teams kind of traded runs. Penn State just jumped all over UConn early. UConn just threw shots at Arseny Sergeev in the third period and in overtime, and then the winning goal, Matt DiMarsico's winning goal, was a thing of beauty. And then the reaction. I didn't really realize how many former players actually kind of snuck their way onto the ice too. That there was a sense of history in that moment, and that it wasn't just, the current players were celebrating, but there were guys, who had played before who came to the game, and they kind of found their way onto the ice just to be a part of that. There was a lot, there was a generational kind of component to that, too, that I think Guy Godowski really summarized well afterward in saying that this is about these guys on this team, but it's for the 15 years or so of players who had come before them.
Well, the first interview I did with Guy Godowski on the Coaches Show, so they're about to get this program going, and I said, let's just be frank, you're starting an expansion team. Right?
Yep.
And he looked at me and he went, wow. He said, I never really thought of it in those terms. He said, but you're exactly right. All these guys that came on the ice all set the foundation for what tomorrow night is. I don't think they're there without those guys.
No, and one of the things he brought up really interestingly about that is initially they had to recruit kind of Penn State sports history. They had to recruit, right. We have this great new building, but Penn State sports really is, that's the foundation of what we're recruiting. We're really not recruiting on Penn State hockey history. Like you said, we're starting an expansion team. And he had players tell him, that's great. We love the place. This looks like a lot of fun. We'll go to football games and stuff like that. Dude, this is great, but I don't want to lose for 4 years. That's what some players actually told him, that they didn't want to go to college and lose, and that's what they felt like might happen, or what they were being told might happen. So he had to really recruit through a lot of that, too. So the guys who were there initially, they set, I think they even set more than a foundation. They set maybe just like, they set a cultural bar of players who wanted to be here and who wanted to be part of a building process. I mean, it wasn't like the Knights, the Golden Knights in Las Vegas, where they just 2 years in there in the Stanley Cup. That's not what he started with at all.
No, there was no expansion draft. All right, so football thoughts? Here they are. They're making the transition now into the second half of spring drills. Any football thoughts?
I think next week, to me, is going to be such a unique period. And when the transfer portal reopens and you're coaching through that just seems like such an antithetical idea to what spring practice is. It's a developmental spot that maybe, usually after spring practice, you might sit down with players and say, here's where you are, right? Here's where you are in your development. Here's where we think you are on the roster, on the depth chart, where you could go if you continue developing. And it's a conversation that you have that is promising, or maybe it's limiting. Say, we don't know how much much more you're going to develop. Maybe consider your options. Well, now starting a week from today, on April 16th, there's guys going to be coming to James Franklin and the position coaches saying, we think we know where we are, and we're going to enter the portal. We're going to start looking around, or agents are going to start shopping these guys to other places. There might be players who've had actually pretty good springs, but maybe still are limited on the depth chart and get shopped. That's just, to me, I'm really curious as to how that moves, how that kind of works its way through Penn State's roster. It's going to happen everywhere. And just, how it's going to happen, finishing spring practice, when you kind of run through this month and you're tired and you're on a sprint, and then all of a sudden you look around and somebody who's at practice this weekend might not be at the blue-white game. You discussed ad nauseum, I'm sure, here about the calendar. This is another spot on the calendar that I feel like is just really mistimed poorly.
I was about to say that. I don't, especially now, the semester is a natural. Okay, yep. They're going to finish the semester anyway. Why doesn't this start and go 15 days when the semester is over? Even like before, like May 1 to May 15. What the heck is wrong with that?
Yeah, it's not like guys are going to not take finals.
Right. They have to stay eligible.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Who's running this thing, Mark?
Yeah.
That's why
we'll find out.
That's why I give the judge a lot of credit.
The other question that he has now, and that goes on with the, what came out of the settlement negotiations this week is about the roster limits. Will that be in place? So I guess Penn State is probably, Franklin and his staff and the recruiting staff, everybody, roster management, they're looking at it. We need to be at 105 in August, or whatever that whatever the deadline might be. We don't even know that. But now, maybe if there is a change in the settlement language, maybe 105 is not in play for this year, and he doesn't even know that. So literally, if you're working toward we have to be at 105 players by August, then you are reshaping your roster this spring in that way. But if you don't know that, if you feel like you can add 10 or 15 players, maybe there's just guys who didn't get work because you thought they wouldn't be here. I don't know that to be the case, but that's just something simple like that. Like, how many players are we going to have on our roster when we play Nevada on August 30th? And to not even know that at this point, 4 months out, is, if James had hair to pull out.
Well, let me put it this way. Here's a quick note for you and for everybody. Some programs have already cut to 105.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
James has not. The walk-ons are still there. And what she said this week about grandfathering those players, which I thought was a slice of wisdom on her part, may play out very well for these players, because darn well if they want to get to a settlement on this thing, they will acquiesce to that. That I really believe they will. So,
and it makes complete sense. So, why have players who were on a roster be part of a cutoff, be part of a manufactured cutoff, who aren't really part, who might not get scholarships anyway, but they can still be part of a roster? What's the harm in that?
Exactly. There is no harm to it. That was her point. That's why if you grandfather it, then, 3-4 years in, then everybody is actually 105, because people will then, quote, graduate out of the program. I thought it was very smart.
At that point, maybe they're at 120, maybe they're at 125 in 3 or 4 years, too. Yeah.
That's fine. There's no issue with that. And they may change the rules on the roster limit, too, for all we know.
Yeah.
Mark, it is always a pleasure. That was a great article, by the way. It really was.
Oh, thanks so much. I really appreciate that from you, Steve.
I really enjoyed that. That was really cool. I liked it a lot. Hey, Mark, be good. We'll see each other soon, okay?
Yep, absolutely. See you then.
Mark Wogenrich, SI.com, does a great job covering Penn State. Always has. One of the outstanding beat writers that cover this program. All right, this half hour brought to you by Sunbury Motors, 4th Street in Sunbury. Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf. And online at sunburymotors.com on News Radio 1070 WKOK.
Party time, game time, or just fun time. Doesn't matter what time it is, because it's Brewers Outlet time. The beverage supermarket has the area's largest beer selection. Imports, microbrews, ciders, and domestics. Pick from over 100 ice-cold 12-packs and dozens of 24-ounce singles. Soda, snacks, hot sauces, fresh roasted peanuts. Make it one-stop party shopping, and don't forget the pickle bar. So whatever you're celebrating or just doing it up, Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street, Sunbury wants to see you. And thank you for your years of patronage.